Or if you don't want to be heard, you can turn them off. So. We are being live streamed. First order is for the members, we'll go around the table, introduce yourselves.
Frank Beal on the CMAP board representing the city of Chicago.
Good morning, Rick Reinbold representing South Suburban Cook.
Good morning, Nancy Rotary, Mayor of Highland Park, representing Lake County.
Morning, Mike Montgomery, City of Chicago.
Rita Athens, City of Chicago.
Diane Williams, South Suburban Cook.
Jerry Bennett representing Southwest Cook.
Erin Alaman, CMAP.
Leanne Redden, RTA, representing the MPO Policy Committee.
And Sheehan, City of Chicago.
Thank you and welcome, Mayor. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Sure you'll enjoy this organization. First item on the agenda is the approval of minutes for October 10th. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Oh, and John, Mayor Noak, you're on the phone.
Mayor Noak, representing Will County.
Sorry, John.
Anybody else on the
Carolyn's on the phone too? Carolyn?
Yep, Carolyn Schofield representing McHenry County.
Good morning, Carolyn. Again, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions? Not all in favor, signify by a vote of aye. Opposed, voted no. Motion carries. First item on the agenda is the executive director's report, Aaron.
Great, sounds
And
good.
by the way, Aaron this morning, of which I could not attend, received Crane's annual 40 and Under Award.
Oh, right.
Significant achievement. I told him I didn't want to receive one, but maybe next year.
Yeah.
Jim, welcome.
Thank you. So thanks everyone for coming this morning on a blustery winter-like day, a little early here. But I'll just note that the 2020 committee schedule is in your packets. The only change that I'll note is I believe that there's one Wednesday where we've moved to the third Wednesday of the month and not the second Wednesday of the month. So we will make sure to remind folks before that happens of the date change. And then a little bit of an update on our Emerging Technology Task Force. So I knew I had the notes in an earlier version, but I don't have them here. So I'll just speak. So one of the things that we're doing coming out of the 2050 plan is to bring together folks to talk about implementation strategies. So we are in the process of talking to stakeholders across the region about what they're doing in terms of emerging technologies related to AV/CV technology, and all sorts of other disruptive technologies that we're seeing show up in cities and regions across our region and other regions across the country, to talk about getting ahead of some of the policy objectives that we might need to as a region, and just thinking about what some of the challenges and opportunities are. Some of the opportunities relate to letting people have greater mobility for all ages. Challenges that may result from that are really just like, what do we think about land use policies and congestion and how these emerging technologies are really impacting the way we're seeing our communities develop. So more to come. We anticipate this will be a 9-month committee convening starting early in the new year, and then hopefully we will have a series of recommendations and ideas that we'll bring forth to the board to consider and debate and talk about and try and make it relevant to the work that you all are doing. So other announcements, I was able to join Mayor Lightfoot and the CTA and CDOT announced their CDOT's Bus Priority Zone program, which is really designed to improve bus travel and make service more reliable. This was $17 million worth of CMAC funds that CMAP programmed for them. And so she also at this event, Mayor Lightfoot spoke about the city's new proposal to address congestion by increasing the taxes charged on solo rideshare trips in the city. This is one of the first instances that we've seen of congestion pricing being implemented in a city. And so it's a big policy platform of CMAP to support congestion pricing. So we were excited to see that and continue to be interested in the data that comes out from that and how it's helping to transition and transform the way people travel and reduce congestion potentially. Also was able to speak at the Journal of Commerce and Inland Distribution Freight Conference and provide really a land use perspective to an organization that traditionally thinks about building warehouses and freight and transportation logistics. So it was an interesting audience to speak to, a lot of folks from Will County who are dealing with building these types of facilities, and I think they were interested to hear about the work that we're doing on the Illinois International Port District, freight and truck routing permit studies that we're doing across the region as well. So one of the things that I remembered to note there was really that increased freight activity is good for our economy, but also it brings a whole bunch of other challenges with it in terms of air quality, safety, and congestion. And so those are important considerations when citing new freight and logistics warehousing locations in the region. Also was able to attend NARC, the National Association of Regional Councils Executive Directors Conference. We heard from the Urban Institute on Metro Washington COG's regional housing target setting, which is something that we haven't necessarily done here, but we know that housing and affordable housing across the region continues to be a challenge. And so learning from our peers about how they're working with their counterparts in their regions about addressing housing shortages was something that was relevant and brought back to our staff here that work on housing issues. And then shared services was another big topic of discussion at the NARC conference. So I know that's something that's of interest to us, and that we have a number of LTA projects that are looking at shared services and providing shared services. We will continue to learn from our peers across the country on that, but just a couple hot topics that I think that are relevant to us here in our region as well. And then lastly, I'll note that I had a meeting with the Chicago Jobs Council where we were discussing a number of areas where CMAP and these workforce providers and agencies can work together. So we specifically talked about the License to Work Act, Senate Bill 1786, that was recently passed through both houses of the General Assembly, which ends license suspensions on a number of non-moving violations, including unpaid parking tickets and vehicle compliance tickets. We are also embarking on our own research here in the region about fares, fines, and fees and equity, and thinking about how they really impact people's ability to get jobs. You know, if you don't have a driver's license, you can't necessarily drive to the places that you need to go. And so we are in the process of scoping that project with our committees and discussing where that will move forward. But we were excited to see that pass and think that it is a critical step forward that we needed to take as a state to be able to address some of these inequities that we see. So with that, I will turn it over back to the chairman.
Thanks, Aaron. Any questions of Aaron on some of the topics? Okay, if not, we'll move on to the committee report, coordinating committee. Frank?
Yes, the coordinating committee met this morning, and for those who, or to remind the board, the coordinating committee was created earlier this year. It replaced the planning committee and the programming committee. It consists of a half a dozen members of the CMAP board as well as committee chairs. It was a way to integrate board deliberations and committee deliberations on a variety of issues. And the focus is on issues that are emergent within CMAP or issues that the staff would like to explore in greater detail. And this morning we addressed two different issues. One was the call for projects, the local technical assistance and the RTA call for projects, which are coordinated call for projects, and review the criteria that are used to assess those projects, as well as provide any advice and counsel to the staff about who they should check in with about some of these projects as they do their evaluations. The other issue, the communications staff reviewed their agenda of communication outlets and asked for our feedback on how well they're doing and any suggestions we might have to improve it. The number of Twitter users among the committee was low, and that may increase after the meeting. But in general, it seemed to us that the communication staff is doing an A job, doing a first-rate job, and has consistently done that. And we hope that our suggestions will get them to A+. So it was a good meeting. And thank you, Stephanie, for your help.
Can I just add one thing?
Sure, Ian.
I learned as I walked in that that CMAP Communications actually got an A from a different organization. Can somebody just quickly tell us? I don't want to misspeak. Melissa? Congratulations.
Yes.
Thanks, Frank. And I think, as Aaron knows, in the interview process with a new executive director, communications was a key aspect of us going forward that we felt was important. And not just even from a transparency standpoint, because I always believed CMAP from day one was the only agency in the metropolitan area that really from day one provided everything and anything somebody could want about this organization to whoever wanted it. But more importantly, the work that goes on with this agency in communicating that publicly to some of the programs and policies. And it's not an easy task to do because it's a very technical group, other than the transportation side, which we all know are the good things to hear about and easy things to understand as far as the spending of federal dollars or state dollars for transportation. But from the planning side of what all the work this agency has put forth in the past and going forward now with the 2050 plan, to try to communicate that and to get input back as to how we can improve that. So yes, congratulations that it's step one in a journey that we hope is going to improve each year. So thanks. All right, moving on. We do have quite a few procurements and contracts, and Angela said she would get through this.
Good morning, Chairman Board. Got 7 procurements today. I'm seeking your approval, and I'll go through them as quickly as I can. So today I'm seeking approval to purchase cloud software and services with Microsoft as part of the agency's disaster recovery and business continuity efforts. Also seeking approval to enter into a contract with Power Construction to provide general contractor services for CMAP's new office and meeting space. This agreement is only for general services and is an estimate of cost based on schematic designs. And once final designs are confirmed and a contractor's guaranteed maximum price is determined, we'll be coming back to the board in the future for a vendor limit increase. Also seeking approval to enter into a contract with Ginkgo Planning and Designing to complete a comprehensive plan for the village of Monee. Seeking approval to enter into a contract with Jacobs Engineering to complete 5 grade crossing feasibility studies for the agency.
Do you know which ones those are offhand, Angela, or not?
My subject matter expert, Bessie.
Still determining. We wanted to.
And was that based upon IDOT's multi-year plan, or these are separate from that?
They're separate.
Sorry, Angela, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. There's a series of data subscriptions we are seeking approval. Near Map, Metro Study, ATRI, MyoVision, EMSI, CoStar, Dun & Bradstreet, and Moody's, and these are used by the agency to conduct land use and transportation analysis. Seeking approval to enter into a sole source agreement with GovHR USA for accounting staffing services to hire on an interim to permanent basis for an accounting principal / controller.
That one I talked to our executive director yesterday about. Believe it or not, we're having difficulty trying to hire an in-house CPA accountant. And because of that, it's been recommended, at least on a temporary basis, that we use GovHR to provide that service to us to eventually hire a permanent full-time accountant CPA. Believe it or not, it's a field that's
In high demand.
most desirable. Yeah. Thanks.
And so that segues into my last one. I'm seeking approval to enter into an agreement with Baker Tilly for temporary and project-based accounting services to support the accounting department during the transition of filling vacant positions. And so, as Aaron mentioned to you, recruiting for these positions in a very competitive market is very challenging. In talking with a couple of the vendors, it's a high demand. Accounting and finance positions are in high demand at this time. And so we're seeking approval for these 2 agreements specifically to address the shortages in accounting. So I'm seeking in total approval for all 7 procurements.
Other questions on that for board members that are new? Each one of these items are vetted by staff as to the RFPs and selection of the best. But questions, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, good morning, Angela. Just one question. So for item 6.2, the construction or the contract with Power Construction, can you talk a little bit about if we have a minority or a woman-owned firm plan in place? So I know that this is still just for the contracting and just the GC portion of it, but for the subs in particular, do we have anything like that in place?
So we spoke earlier, I'll just say it for the board. So this is just for general services. This is, once we're done with schematic designs and we go into final designs, we will come back to the board with a vendor limit increase for the general contractor. At that time, they're required to pick their subs. And so if there's an opportunity for minority participations on the sub side, that would be the time when we need to address it. But this is just for general services. This is to get them on board so we can complete schematic designs and final designs and get our pricing in line. So this is what I'm asking for today, but we do need to come back to the board for second round of approval on the general contractor, and at that time, we can talk about minority participation on the subcontractor side.
Mike, you brought that up before, and staff has certainly been instructed on any type of contractual thing that could involve or would involve of minority hiring, that we are going to do our best to solicit and hopefully or eventually be able to make that hire.
Absolutely, and I always appreciate, you always being open and receptive to the conversations that we
Oh,
have.
absolutely.
And the dialogue on that. It's just such a great project and such a landmark project. Just really want to make sure that we're representative when that actually goes into play.
Absolutely. Thank
And we
you.
are moving along with the project.
Yeah, I'll let your executive director want to give an update on it?
You know what,
or-
before you do that, why don't we go ahead first and address the issues of the procurements
steal
and
it.
contracts? Are there any other comments or questions, Frank?
Yeah, on the Jacobs engineering issue, it's not clear to me exactly what that is. It reads sort of like pre-engineering or something.
Feasibility study, yes, but if Jesse wants
Is
to
that
dig a little deeper
right?
on that, yeah.
Because the grade crossings have been studied endlessly and funded never.
Yes, and that's one of the issues we're trying to tackle. Upfront planning work, help us determine whether or not we move forward.
The thought being that more detailed look would generate more interest in providing funding?
Well, and I think a more accurate representation of what the total cost of the grade crossing separation project might be as well, and so some of the challenges. So until you get into some of those details, you aren't able to sort of say, is there going to be a right-of-way issue? Or, it's generalities until you get to that point. So
Yeah.
our hope is really to spur some of these projects to move forward by doing a thoughtful look at sort of a pre-phase one work.
Good, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I'll entertain a motion that we accept all seven of the contracts. Is there a motion?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further questions? If not, all in favor, signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, vote of no. Motion carries. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.
You want to comment on the building?
The building and construction information that you just voted on for general contractor helps keep us on track as we can do all the things and line all the things up that we need to in order to get into the old post office space. We should be in there by August of next year. Right now, we're really going through the interior design process and shoring up how our conference space will look, figuring out the staff layout, making sure that, the lunchroom is in appropriate places. I think one of the unique things about this space is that while it is a smaller footprint than this building, we are finding that, there a lot more usable space than there is in this space. Obviously, we've got this giant sort of elevator bay in the center of the office, so we're trying to use that to our advantage to make the best use of the space. And we'll have more to share with you once those details are nailed down.
I was just talking to Diane prior to the meeting, and I think fortunately we signed the contract at the right time, because it's incredible the amount of corporations now that are going into the old post office. That's really going to be tech heaven. I'm concerned we're going to lose employees because they can go right down the hall and apply for Uber,
Put an invisible fence
Walgreens. Honestly, in about...
Don't give them ideas, thank you.
It's not that, the names are on the door so they can see it. But I would imagine in 4 or 5 years, they may lease out almost all that space over there. It's exciting. And as we move along, we'll obviously update you and give you information regarding. Okay, moving along. Under the LTA program, We have both Stephanie and Tony.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Nice to see you. I want to give you a quick update on the local technical assistance and community planning call for projects, as well as the Small Plans, Big Ideas event series that we had in September and October, sort of in conjunction. First, the series of events, we had 6 events. 5 of them were throughout the region, and 1 was downtown on CMAP Day, as you remember. Thank you for attending many of them and speaking at them. We find that they were all very successful in the regional events. We had 50 to 60 registrants and attendees. And each one of those events, if you recall, were focused on a specific topic. We actually had, and most of the, many of the attendees came from other parts of the region. None of them were very localized, we felt, so we got people traveling, which was good. And then the Chicago Symposium on October 10th had about 175 registrants, and that had various panels throughout the day. A lot of partners were involved in all of these events, and we think they were great. And it was, the purpose of the events was to highlight all of the services that we provide at CMAP and the work that we do with our partners, and most importantly throughout the region with our municipal partners as well, and allowed them to showcase the things that they were working on and the planning challenges they were trying to solve and new emerging challenges that we're all trying to solve. We think it was successful. We did it in conjunction with the call for projects, and we find that that was also successful because we received 81 applications from 70 different applicants. So the call for projects opened on September 17th and closed on October 18th. And as in years past, we partnered with the RTA, our good friends at the RTA. We had 1 application, and it was online this year, which we found hopefully was easier for applicants to apply to us and less cumbersome. And so the evaluation is now started. RTA is looking at, I think, 14 of them that have a major transit focus. We're looking at all of them as well, hopefully to find some opportunities to partner with the RTA on projects as we have been doing the past few years. Our internal evaluation has started with many staff from CMAP, and also our external evaluation, which includes bringing all the applications to all the working committees, our transportation partners, the COGs, the PLs, county planning directors, the departments of transportation, and for the city applications that we're actually today meeting with departments of planning and development, CDOT, and Department of Housing to get their feedback on the city applications. Because of the 16 city applications, most of them came from neighborhood groups or wards. So their feedback to us is very valuable as we go through this process. So our evaluation will probably last most of this calendar year, and we anticipate bringing our recommended selection of projects, we're thinking in the spring. And of course, once we get into January and we have our preliminary selections, we'll bring those back to all of the committees and to some of our partners to get their feedback as well before we ask you for our final approval. I'm happy to answer any questions today on the process, the timeline, applications if you want. I have many of them committed to memory, I think. And I told that joke earlier, so sorry for the coordinating committee folks. But any questions, I'm happy to answer.
How about the funding aspect of this? Where do we sit at as far as being able to financially fund the dollar amounts for these projects, and how many, I missed it, how many we end up selecting?
To be determined, and that depends. So last year we had 74 applications. I think we chose 17 full LTA applications or applicants, and then another 12 were helping further scope their work. But it depends on the type of work that we want to take on. Stephanie, do you want to have any more to add to that, or not to put you on the spot, but?
Yeah, we're anticipating that we'll actually be able to take the same number of applications this year as we did last year. However, we'll probably have more of those applications will be contract-led. It's really been a great way for us to be able to provide more services to the region by utilizing our contract partners. And we do have funding available from the UWP Competitive Fund from last year, and we're anticipating we're going to ask for additional funds this year. We've been partnering with RTA on those funds as well, and it's been a really good way to fund this work.
Can I ask, I probably should have asked this earlier today, but do we look at low-hanging fruit? Do we say that, there are those projects that are really complex and require a lot of effort over a long period of time and a lot of dollars? And there are other projects that are meaningful projects, but can be done in a shorter time frame with fewer resources. Do we consider that?
We absolutely do, and actually last year, for the first time, we actually took on 12 projects that were exactly that, sort of that low-hanging fruit. So in addition to the 17 sort of traditional LTA projects, we took on 12 that were really ones that we thought we could do in 6 months, but do something where we can help our community sort of get the ball rolling. A couple of those have turned into full LTA applications for this year, which was the intent.
On the funding question again, I know, I think this is one of the best programs that CMAP does. And when you say we've got 80-plus applications and we, go down to 17 or plus, is there ways to gather more funding to fund more of these? I think it's such a tangible thing that makes such a difference. Is there other sources that we're looking at, or?
We are looking at that, and actually, Aaron, if you wanted to chime in too, that's one of the things I think under Aaron's leadership, we are looking at how do we look at all the different funding sources and making sure that we are leveraging all of the opportunities available to us. One way to do that is we're looking at prioritizing some of the different Onto 2050 recommendations, and how can we focus in on some of those areas, and that makes it funders more attractive because we're sort of focusing in on issues that they really care about. So that's one thing that we're doing, sort of looking at how we can tailor some of our work to make sure that we can take advantage of those other funding sources.
And just to further add to that, so Tony, you said that CMAP did 17, RTA did like 14 or so again last year as well. So it's almost
Okay,
more than double. And we also do the sit down with agencies or whoever applies and sort of say, okay, what else can we do? Can we provide some staff support? So it
Okay.
is a little bit more like double, get at least some touch and some work from the collectively across the two agencies. But I mean, your point is well taken. There's never really enough money. And sometimes though, the applications that come in aren't necessarily ready for anything yet. So it's sort of work with staff. Let's develop this into what might be a real project that could be done. In some cases too on our side, some of them might be like access to transit. We actually fund small capital improvements, like a pedestrian crossing button at a intersection, things like that. So we'll do some of those things as well. So there's a broader touch and reach, I guess is probably a better way to describe it than just the sort of the actual 17 or 14 that get sort of the fuller, bigger grants.
Yeah, well, and I think too, by prioritizing how we're going to implement the 2050 plan, we'll be able to better project over the next couple of years with the capacity of staff and the resources that we'll have to take on for this. And then it's also been helpful, so as we go through and develop more of a 3 to 5 year work plan, I think it is helpful to show our funding partners across the state or even in the region, the philanthropic partners who have really sort of, one of our primary partners, the Chicago Community Trust, has just relaunched their strategic programmatic initiatives too, many of which align with our regional goals and objectives as well. So we're looking for opportunities to continue to align the work that we're doing on the LTA project. And then I've been out meeting with IEPA, IDNR, and other state agencies too, to see if there are ways for us to continue to align funds to help reach this region's goals and objectives.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
And you're right, Rita, what launched this agency from day one, after we initially announced the 2040 plan, was Senator Durbin able to get $3.25 million, which generated the initial or launch of the LTA program. And from that cemented the partnership in this region in helping communities. That's what it's all about. So the idea, though, of federal funds may be down the road, but that type of large amount of money would go a long way. And you can see each year we continue to have 2 or 3 times the amount of agencies apply versus monies that we have going forward. So we'll work and do our best, and hopefully down the road that we can seek some additional funding.
No, thank you, and I appreciate all the additional sources that you're looking at, especially like the federal and foundations. I think that's really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments?
Question. Are there any sort of emerging scopes or issues that you're seeing in the applications that were presented, or are they pretty diverse so far?
They're always very diverse, but and I think we learned this through the event series too. Stormwater, flooding, things related to climate change and resilience, I think, are emerging topics that we are investigating and looking for additional funding sources so we can provide more of that assistance. Some in the weeds zoning type stuff came out in some of our discussions as well, and also I would say multi-jurisdictional planning and partnering beyond municipal borders is something we encourage, but we are seeing more and more of that through the conversations we're having, and we're getting more applicants that are focusing more on a regional or a sub-regional level. Which we think is great because that helps us prioritize where we invest our time and effort and even capital dollars as well. And it's showing that our partners in the region are starting to think collectively instead of competing.
I would think on the comment of stormwater or flood management, that certainly those are probably coming from towns outside of Cook County, because the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District has an incredible program to help and assist through the local councils on flooding and storm management. That actually is a model I would think and hope that the other counties at some point in time take a look at in assisting local governments and or even unincorporated areas on flood water management, because the district has spent millions and millions of dollars now with multiple programs helping the region throughout their area, their district. So.
Yeah, we're seeing applications from all over the region now. Still some in Cook County though, and actually MWRD also applied to us, I think to broaden some of the work that they're doing as well with our help. Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to item number 8 on climate resilience, helping communities identify and reduce flooding risk. Nora? There you go.
Thank you.
See? That's why I'm chairman.
I love maps. All right, my name is Nora Beck. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Right. I'm a senior planner here.
Okay, little thing's not on.
All right, how's that? Okay. My name is Nora Beck. I'm a senior planner here at CMAP, and I'm hoping to provide you with a summary of how we've been helping communities reduce their flood risk and ultimately prepare them for climate change. I'm going to provide you with some background on a tool that we developed, the Flood Susceptibility Index. I'm also going to provide an overview of 12 different LTA projects that we undertook with funding from Cook County's Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program, or CDBG-DR. And then I'll close by talking about some next steps that we've identified. So as you are all aware, resilience is a core principle of the ONTO 2050 plan. And in terms of climate change, it's all about our ability to absorb, adapt, and be better prepared for those shocks and stresses that we could see in the future. There's a saying going around climate scientists that if climate change is a shark, then water resources are the teeth. In our region, flooding is definitely among one of the main impacts that we are already seeing from climate change. And as heavy rainstorms become more frequent and stronger than in the past, our drainage systems can fail and result in flooding and financial losses. And one of the main reasons for that is that we are simply designing our infrastructure for storms that we are no longer seeing. So Bulletin 70 is how we design our stormwater infrastructure, and it first came out in 1989. One of the storm frequencies to pay attention to is the 100-year, 24-hour storm event, and that's what we use to design our stormwater detention facilities. The state recently updated our rainfall frequency standards, which is really exciting. It adds decades of information on how we design our infrastructure. But you can see that storm event that we pay attention to has now increased by over an inch. Now that might seem like a small change, but when we look to see what a storm event of our current infrastructure will now serve, it's now closer to a 50-year storm event. So the level of service that we're getting from our existing infrastructure is diminishing as we have changes in precipitation patterns. One of the main recommendations of the ONTO 2050 plan is to reduce flood risk to protect people and assets. And we outlined several strategies, including these 3: identify and communicate flood risk, improve planning to reduce current and future risk, and then address flood vulnerability of our critical transportation assets. For the rest of my presentation, I'm going to step through how our recent and current work are contributing to these strategies, and then I'll close with those next steps. So identify and communicate flood risk. A more current and comprehensive understanding of where flood risk is evolving under climate change is definitely going to be needed if we're going to reduce that risk and also prioritize our investments. When we started the ONTO 2050 planning process, we needed to learn more about how flooding was impacting the region. We got our hands on tons of federal flood damage data. We mapped out over $1 billion of damages by zip code as shown in this map. And of the claims where we had address information, more than 70% of the damage locations were for locations outside of the 100-year floodplain. So that's a big deal for us planners, right? Because we use the floodplain to guide investment away from risky areas. And we also knew that this wasn't the full picture. We couldn't get access to private insurance claims which we suspect is about 50% of total damages. And we also knew that the federal damage claims that we did have were biased in a couple of different ways. The first one is that they're they're accessed by higher household incomes, or households with higher incomes, or more familiarity with these different programs or language issues. And we also know that the vast majority of the damage payments are coming from some pretty significant presidentially declared disasters. And we know that those storms impacted certain portions of the region more than others. So we wanted to develop a tool that would give us a better sense of where urban flooding was happening, and that would allow the region to prioritize our investments. And we also wanted to focus in on areas that were outside of the 100-year floodplain so we could add value to that community planning process. We ultimately arrived at the Urban Flood Susceptibility Index using a GIS-based approach. We took all of the flood damage locations that we could get our hands on. We evaluated what the characteristics of those places were based on flooding-related factors. And then we identified all the other portions of the region that had those same characteristics. The resulting index portrays the potential relative risk of urban flooding. So the darker the blue, the higher the susceptibility, and the lighter the green, the lower susceptibility. But importantly, it can be rescaled based on your jurisdiction or your watershed boundary. It's important to note that we developed the index with support from the MacArthur Foundation. We were also guided by engineering consultants, and we had an advisory committee composed of all the county stormwater management agencies, the City of Chicago, the Illinois State Water Survey, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It's exciting to see that we have partners already using the index and helping us reach that main objective of prioritizing investment. The MWRD Stormwater Master Planning Program used the index as one of their criteria to figure out where they should prioritize future master planning efforts. The Nature Conservancy's Urban Greenprint similarly used the index to identify areas where land conservation could have the biggest impact. Nationally, we see there's a lot of interest in figuring out how to identify urban flooding, and we've been part of that conversation. The City of New York convened a climate resilient planning workshop for utilities across the country and asked us to present the index as well as our approach. So we are excited to have the index as it's guiding our own planning work, but it's clearly not enough. We need to integrate this information into our planning decisions to prepare for climate change. So municipal land use planning efforts have historically not included good coverage of stormwater issues. Yet I contend that they have the power to both contribute to the problem as well as be part of the solution. After the April 2013 floods, Cook County contacted us to help them help communities prepare for the next future storm events. And we were able to do this in 12 different, let's see, where am I? This funding allowed us to take on stormwater management components of 12 different LTA projects. So I wanted to give you a sense of what we were able to accomplish now that that funding program is complete, and along the way show you a little bit of our process. So during our existing conditions analysis, when we want to understand where flooding could be happening within a community, we take a look at a number of different data sets. On the left, you'll see an image from Calumet Park, where we use GIS tools to get a better sense of how water is flowing across the landscape. And then we used our flood index to help prioritize where that flooding risk could be greatest. Sometimes we need more information. In the example of Berwyn's a pretty uniform community, and so our flood index doesn't work quite as well. It all lights up as red. So we use a sewer shed analysis to understand where we should focus our time and effort. We then start looking at land use opportunities, and this happens in concert with other community goals that we're uncovering along the way as part of the planning process. The example on the left is from Maine Northfield. It's an unincorporated areas plan for Cook County. During the planning process, the revitalization of multifamily properties emerged as a core component of the plan, and that was identified as a potential solution for localized flooding as well. And in Richton Park, we took a step back and laid out a framework to include flooding and stormwater recommendations before development occurred, and hopefully avoiding the flooding issues that the rest of us are dealing with. Funding from Cook County also allowed us to use engineering consultants to develop concept plans and cost estimates. So this This helps us identify the next steps of recommended interventions and hopefully gets the community closer to implementation. In the example on the left, we developed concept plans in Sauk Village to complement an undersized detention basin. And then on the right in Midlothian, we were able to take that a step further and develop a stormwater management capital improvement plan. Finally, the next recommendation I wanted to touch on from Monty 2050 was that we need to address the flood vulnerability of our critical transportation assets. We know that flooding doesn't just impact our building, but also the performance and maintenance of our transportation assets. Flooding can cause road closures or bus rerouting, leading to emergency response or job access issues. Inclement weather is estimated to cause about 15% of the congestion on our networks across the nation, and we could anticipate that increasing over time with climate change. Flooding can also lead to more catastrophic events like washed out bridges or culverts, as well as the more subtle changes that shorten the life expectancy of our roads. And so in On to 2050, we recognized that we needed to investigate this further and envisioned a vulnerability assessment of our region's network to inform decision making. Luckily, in this last year's call for LTA projects, the Central Council of Mayors were thinking the same thing. They requested assistance from us to identify where flooding and stormwater needs coincide with transportation infrastructure to hopefully co-locate the solutions. We're going to learn a lot from the process, and we look forward to sharing that with you and hopefully advancing our efforts here. So adapting to climate change is going to require a constant update of where the flooding risk is and incorporating those solutions into our planning projects. We are hoping to continue to integrate stormwater management considerations in our LTA projects. In this last round, as Tony alluded to, we got 8 different stormwater management plan applications, which is more than ever. And we also see a lot of synergies with other comprehensive plans where they could benefit from integrating stormwater management. I think this reflects that growing concern that we're seeing with flooding and climate change. And we'll also be looking to advance the flood susceptibility index. We can explore other factors. We could also think through how different climate scenarios could impact our region and be prepared for the range of possible impacts. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions if time allows.
Any questions of Nora? Jim?
Yeah, the map you had earlier, can't take into effect, I mean, it's been specified. Reduce the amount of flooding?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's something that we weren't able to do in this last round of urban flood susceptibility index, and it was generally a point of intense debate, right? Because flood solutions can eventually fail, so it might be useful to keep track of those just generally higher susceptible locations. But we do want to investigate how does this map change if we shorten the time period to account for those capital improvements designed for flooding. So it's something definitely to explore.
So this susceptibility map is based upon what criteria?
I'm glad you asked.
I just got back from Miami, a large urban county caucus meeting, and we actually had have to do with talking about how Miami is facing things on several counties.
Yeah.
We talked afterwards, work they do. Send our staff out on the country to get things like.
Yeah, that's great. That's
I'm
great.
curious as you came up with that.
Yeah, so our flood susceptibility index is based on 6 different factors. I won't step through all of these, but just sort of describe what makes an area higher susceptible, more highly susceptible to flooding in our index. It's typically been first developed before 1972, before any stormwater management regulations were in place. It's often in a combined sewer service area. It has a moderate to high amount of impervious cover, which means there's not a lot of places for the water to go if the sewers are overwhelmed. We also paid attention to the variation of precipitation across the region, so some areas actually get more water per rain event than others. And we also paid attention to the elevation of the parcels themselves. So are they at or below the base flood elevation of a nearby floodplain, or are they in a bowl or a low-lying area where water could pool? So these are the indicators that we're looking at right now.
Base it off of floodplain, which actually takes into effect from our projects that are already in place. That's so it actually does take.
Well, we don't have a comprehensive inventory of flood mitigation infrastructure, so it's hard for us to gauge that. But we're looking at damage payments, so really just tracking where has it flooded in the past and what are the characteristics of those places.
Flood elevations have been affected by stormwater.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Well, that has to do with a reapplication of FEMA to get out of the flood, flood zone, so that is significant and can be tracked. And again, in Cook County, I know with Southwest and our watershed council, that we are very, very active with the district in getting funding, for major projects along with even local projects, to the point of the district offered 2 years ago now a buyout of properties that are in that bowl that can never really be taken out. And as to Miami and along the coast and everywhere else, the Mississippi rivers, honestly, the most economic way is a buyout of those properties and let it return to its natural watershed composition. That's a reality. Unfortunately, some have learned, we're all learning now, as urban development took place. But that is something we're even looking at locally with a few scattered areas where there's no way that we'll ever be able to drain or properly, try to control water management. It's going to have to be a buyout, and that's an offer again by the district. And I know you're probably working closely with them on their information. But to the mayors of Cook County, on your watershed councils, please be active in it, because there's funding out there and there's resources to help probably solve some of the little bit more regional aspects of flood management with the money that they have or could provide for it, including studies.
I think it's also important to note that we're very thankful to the Illinois State Water Survey for updating those precipitation standards, right? Now we have a better sense of what is the rainfall that we're currently experiencing. And all of our floodplain maps are going to need to be updated to reflect that new information, right? They're based on older rainfall frequencies. So it's a big project to be moving that regulation along, as well as adapting and figuring out solutions.
So we're getting a lot more information, we're getting a lot smarter about this, and we're having a better sense of where the real issues are. We allow people then to apply for support from us through the LTA program and that sort of thing. What kind of outreach do we do to those communities that we've already identified as having the most problems?
Well, most of our outreach to date is when we're doing a specific planning project, and we include flooding from the get-go through the outreach process. We want to make sure that we understand where is flooding within a community when we're designing solutions. And often these issues can be pretty hidden, right? Nobody wants to talk about their sewer basement backup. They don't want to admit that.
Our residents don't have a problem doing that.
So we know that there's a lot of information to be gained from stakeholders, and they're going to have to be part of the solution too, right? There's a lot of issues on private property that require education to adapt to.
I was just curious if we targeted any of those sort of the highest problem areas and that sort of thing, as opposed to just putting it generally out there and available to everybody.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think it's something that we should think about. I guess I'm excited that the MWRD is using our data in their own efforts, and they do a lot of outreach and communication. And as we look back at the flood susceptibility index, Cook County is definitely the higher scoring area, so I think that helps us.
Well, and
Go ahead.
I was just going to add too, if it's okay, that one of the things that when we started the local technical assistance program that we saw was lots of communities applying on their own for comprehensive plans or bicycle and pedestrian plans. And as Tony mentioned earlier, we are seeing a lot of communities come in together in terms of multi-jurisdictional projects. And I'll say that this agency made a concerted effort to incent those types of projects and getting folks working together across jurisdictional boundaries on transportation issues. And I think the water issue is another place where we can start to sort of lay the groundwork with the tools that we have, and given our limited resources, that we need to work together to sort of leverage these resources. And I think, Diane, as you mentioned, really sort of be more intentional about the types of projects that we want to get to is definitely an opportunity that we could take advantage of in the future.
Thank you.
On behalf of Lake County, I'm certainly going to ask that we somehow coordinate if we haven't already coordinated. If you put the map back up, you'll see we've been detrimentally impacted tremendously in recent years. We've had 6 major floods in the last 2 years, looking at Waukegan, even along the right side of the map. We held a meeting about 3 weeks ago with federal, state, county, everybody was represented. We had 20 people on the dais and about 200 people in the room. So there's a huge need for interaction in terms of Lake overlapping into Cook, and we had representation from Cook and Congresswoman Schakowsky's office as well. So just would love to start that communication if it's not existing there.
Yes, I believe it is, but
Great.
more, sure.
Mike Warner is my hero. Thank you.
One other point about Cook County with the MWRD was all the work that went into passing the WMO, which is the new coordinating ordinance on development. And it's very restrictive for the purpose of the planning that you're showing here. So there are a lot of things that are being applied to local governments in a planning setting to at least meet certain standards or conditions for development to take place. So those things are already out there. And again, it's a matter of the community working, and they'll find out soon, because when a permit is submitted to the district and it's rejected, it's because it doesn't meet certain criteria of detention, retention, and/or supplementary, watershed areas, or to provide water detention in the area. So, those items are out there. And again, from the other counties, I don't know how far advanced they are, whether the district.
We have those. We
If the
absolutely
district
have
is
those.
that much above everybody else, but my understanding, right, is the counties have also enacted those type of ordinance on literally forcing local governments to consider development going forward as to what they need to provide. Rick?
Is your presentation available on our website?
Yeah, I was going to ask that too.
I think it will be, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
And I just had a question about the census tract, or what's the smallest tract that information is available? We're focused on the city's south and west side that seem to be very prone to flooding, and figuring out how we can get the resources to address it, but wanting to look at like the highest need areas. And so what is sort of the smallest area, like by community? Is it by municipality, by region? Like how?
It's actually by 5 foot.
Oh, okay. So we could do it by
squares.
backyard and, okay. that's
So
great.
very small. We don't recommend interpreting it at that resolution.
Yeah.
Aggregating it
Sure.
up to a parcel level or to a catchment, to a sewer catchment or other watershed boundary would probably be better to help
Yeah.
prioritize.
That's great. Thank you.
The only thing I would add, Mr. Chairman, is in conjunction with the question that was asked earlier about our funding. Nora mentioned it, but this was an example of where we were able to get a community development block grant from Cook County, and that enabled us to expand our work into this area. So we're hoping to pursue other of those types of funding sources to continue this work.
Excellent. Other questions, Nora? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Look forward to hearing more going forward in the future. Gordon, under state legislative update. I gather you're not in Springfield for the veto session.
So, yeah, Mayor, thank you. There is not a lot CMAP worthy going on down there, I would say. And not really a lot to report. Ethics has been called into question for the last couple of weeks, and I think that has really distracted the General Assembly from taking any significant action. And so there are some pretty serious discussions going on related to municipal pensions. Clean Energy Jobs Act was discussed. There's a cleanup discussion going on with the operational budget and the BEMP bill. There's also some gaming cleanup that needs to take place, and so, in my opinion, they're going to adjourn tomorrow. I don't know that they'll have enough time to get any of that done. My guess is they're teeing that up for quick action when they come back in January, but that's to be seen.
Well, we're hoping pensions gets passed today, so.
Right.
May I suggest and ask, and I've talked to the board and Aaron and you specifically about a major priority this spring session of attempting to try to get us funding on non-transportation, but straight funding from the General Assembly as an appropriated amount annually. I really think I think we've got a governor, at least I think, is progressive enough to understand the importance of that. and that we prioritize that as an issue, our issue downstate, come spring.
So thank you for that introduction into the next discussion. So thank you for that. That will be part of our priority activities. In your packet, there is a memo that talks about the legislative priorities for the agency. And just to give you a little bit of background for some of the newer members, what this does is feeds into a document that we use, Anthony and I and the other legislative team, to engage the Illinois General Assembly, members of the governor's staff, the agency heads, that basically lays out the priorities for the agency. We use that to kind of guide what they understand how we are going to respond to different initiatives as you look through the lens of onto 2050 and some of the actions that this board has taken. So right now, what we have before you are 5 priority issues that we would like for you to discuss. We will bring back the full document to you in January in hopes of your approval, so that we can hit the ground running when the General Assembly returns. What you will see in this is nothing new. It's a little bit repackaged at this point, but we're open for discussion, and if there are things that are glaringly missing, we would invite your input. The one thing I would say about the funding issue, I think you've heard over and over, and I think the conversation continues internally as we try to identify priorities for the agency, is that the constraints that are applied on us because we are so transportation focused makes it a problem for us to do the comprehensive work that we've been charged to do by the state. And so that is a reality. That is something that we will be advocating for as we move forward. And so I open it up for discussion and questions.
Comments, questions? I think it's pretty clear, Gordon. This agency was formed by an act of the General Assembly, and in that act, they're supposed to fund us. That never took place. And I hope to go down there myself, Aaron, with you and try to convince, certainly from the governor down, the need for this agency to receive proper funding, non-transportation funding. And it's not only ours. Anytime we've gone down there in the past, we've pitched for outside this metro region for them in a land planning funding aspect. So it's not that we're trying to strictly just do it for us. We believe that throughout the entire state they need the proper funding to do the proper job in planning. I don't think they're doing it at the level we are, but still in all, the approach is statewide. So it's
Correct.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move along here. The board has to go in exec session to discuss executive session minutes, whether to release them or not, so hopefully that will be very quick. Under other business, any other business for the board, other than to let you know that we are off for the month of December, and we'll come back in January. After our executive session, the executive committee will meet quickly in the county room, or the Will County room. So I'll open up any comments from the public. None being, again, the board will stay here for executive session. I'll ask the audience to please leave the room. We will come back officially to close the meeting if you want to hang around for that, for the closing of the meeting. But other than that, I'll entertain a motion that we go into exec session.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.